of a time so different from the bubbling 20s. The poets and playwrights, composers and painters find their inspiration. The themes that dominate their work: angry protest against the sorry state of the world and a probing search for the causes of the nationwide misery. But two-thirds of all New York theaters closed by 1931. Broadway's lights are far from bright, but the 30s produced sparkling surprises, such as the imaginative opera of Gertrude Stein and Virgil Thompson, Four Saints in Three Acts. For many leading performers, like modern dancer Martha Graham, the grim period provides an opportunity for challenging experimentation. New techniques give luster to new names, and sculpture the sprightly ballet dancers and other airy mobiles of Alexander Calder gain acclaim. In music, the fresh harmonies of composer Aaron Copland stir concert audiences. Men's minds and hands combine to add color to the drabness that afflicts so many lives. As the new deal gets underway, the artist's urge to fight apathy with action is a reflection of the country's determination to embark on daring and vigorous new ventures in almost every phase of American life.
10,000 years from now, I think we can meditate and wonder whether our descendants, because I think they'll still be here, what they will think about us. And let us hope that at least they will give us the benefit of the doubt, that they will believe that we have honestly striven in our day and generation to preserve for our descendants a decent land to live in and a decent form of government to operate under.
For many artists and writers, the 30s is a time of reaffirmation, a time to seek, even when distressed, the solid values obscured by the surface glitter of the 20s. Literary critic Maxwell Geismar recalls the era.
What puzzles me some is why we continue to glamorize the 1920s and to deprecate the 1930s. I say that those of us who lived through these years found Washington in the 30s just as exciting as Paris in the 20s, and it made more sense. If you had to pick the typical writer of the Depression years, it would be Tom Wolfe. Wolfe lived poor. He lived in the Brooklyn slums. He wrote intensely. He could write all day or all night. Things poured out of him. During his own periods of creativity, which was something like a sustained period of madness, he discovered that there was even a greater darkness outside of him than the darkness within. Everywhere around me during those years, he wrote, I saw the evidences of a universal calamity. Ruin and suffering had affected the lives of everybody I knew. The staggering impact of this black picture of man's inhumanity to his fellow man, the unending repercussions of those scenes of violence, of brute authority, of suffering, starvation, cold, filth, and hunger, left a scar upon my life and a conviction in my soul which I shall never forget. And this scar and this conviction was the common heritage and the common mark of the American writers in the 1930s.
John Steinbeck's powerful novel, The Grapes of Wrath, provokes demands for decent treatment of migrant workers. Erskine Caldwell portrays the impoverished South in Tobacco Road, and John Dos Passos' trilogy, USA, lays bare the tawdriness of pre-Depression times. In another massive trilogy, James T. Farrell narrates the struggles of Studs Lonigan to escape from Chicago's South Side. And Richard Wright's Native Son focuses national attention on the special sorrows of the Negro. And then there are other proletarian authors like Albert Halper, whose novel Union Square glorifies the radical. Many writers, responding to the Communist Party's shrill nagging for a united front against fascism, swing far to the left themselves.
There was, in 1935, to which everybody went. Even Van Wyck Brooks, the great cultural historian of America's past, even Brooks went. And as he wrote about it later, he said that when I discovered the little communist boys and girls were pulling all the strings, I lost interest. But he wasn't terrified of this threat. I like that phrase, the little communist boys and girls. They were youngsters to Brooks. By the end of the decade, after the Spanish Civil War, after the purge trials in the mid-30s, after the Russo-Nazi pact, most of these American writers had drifted away from this extreme left. By the end of the decade, the Communist Party in America, which never was very bright, I think, had lost most of its influence on American writers.
Even the expatriate Ernest Hemingway has come home and turned towards social significance. In 1937, he brings out a novel with an American setting, To Have and Have Not, while William Faulkner continues his studies of Southern degradation. And Sherwood Anderson aptly titles his book of essays, Puzzled America. Maxwell Geismar.
Anderson came from the Ohio small towns. He traveled. He went to the desolate coal mines. He went to the abandoned farms. He went to the cities, the slums in the cities, which he knew from his Chicago days. I can't help feeling, he said, that this thing we are going through, this depression, the old, proud, arrogant America blown up, that out of this is going to come the chance of something humanizing.
Unprecedentedly, the government becomes a patron of the arts. Countrywide projects for unemployed writers and other creative people are inaugurated. The Federal Theater alone employs 10,000, and from one end of America to the other, provides live entertainment for audiences of 30 million, many of whom are seeing their first stage show. Painters and sculptors embellish thousands of schools, courthouses, and other public buildings. Most arts and crafts are represented. The gulf that has long separated artists from their fellow citizens is narrowed. American themes are stressed, assorted along with the beautiful. In the murals of Thomas Hart Benton, the sharecropper is a prominent figure. Social realism is the order of the day. Philip Evergood's blunt and biting work attracts wide interest. To accommodate the vast output that flows from the studios of Chaim Gross and his contemporaries, new museums are built. For artists, it is another renaissance. In the field of music, the government sets up symphony orchestras and subsidizes choral groups like this one, directed by Juanita Hall. The government doesn't stop there. The Library of Congress sends research teams into the field to record and preserve heretofore unrecognized aspects of Native American culture.
Well, I heard mighty rumbling, and then I looked around. Was a northern and a southern, and that'll be pulled down. Woo!
The head of the Federal Theater, Hallie Flanagan, sees it as a social and educative force. Among its forceful innovations is the Living Newspaper series and Sinclair Lewis's dramatization of his anti-fascist novel, It Can't Happen Here. Lewis reads from his play.
You've got to know someday your father wasn't killed in an automobile accident. Corporals killed him. You understand?
Why do corporals do things like killing Daddy?
Because they hate people that love the truth. They hate the free, inquiring, critical spirit.
Free, inquiring, critical spirit.
It's the Federal Theater's biggest hit.
We're having a book burning on the green tomorrow night. A what? Gonna burn up all this subversive literature. A lot of smutty stuff that's corrupting public morals. Have you got any objections?
Well, you won't find any subversive books here.
Oh. Now, how about this fella? Now, this fella, Charles Dickens, wasn't he a communist?
The theater project's basic purpose to keep actors from starving. But there are valuable byproducts. Producer John Houseman.
There were a number of these federal projects all over the country. I was personally concerned with one in the beginning called the Negro Federal Theater Project. And we decided to take a bold step, and we decided to do one of Shakespeare's great tragedies, Macbeth. And the obvious person to put this on was a man with whom I became associated and who really has been more important in my life in the theater almost any other place than anyone else, and that is Orson Welles. I invited Orson, who was then all of 18 and a half, to come up to Harlem and to stage Macbeth. The whole play done as a rebellion in Haiti.
If thou beest slain and with no stroke of mine, my wife and children's ghosts will haunt thee still. What is thy name? My name's Macbeth. Turn, hellhound, turn! All men else I have avoided thee, but get thee back. My soul is too much charged with blood of thine already. Lay on, Macduff, and damned be he who first cries, hold enough!
There was no way to get rich quick. There was no way to make big money doing the kind of work that we wanted to do. And so there was no choice. You simply worked at the things that excited you, at the things that presented themselves suddenly before you as an opportunity to create. You followed these lines because they were the only lines you could follow. By and large, I would say that a high percentage of the young people who today are the famous people in American show business at one point or another touched the Federal Theater and were aided by the Federal Theater. I'm always a little suspicious of events that are viewed through the glow of memory, especially youthful memory. But I don't think there's any question that we had a much better time, let's say the young in the theater, in the 30s than the present generation. And I am filled with pity for them because I don't think they knew any of the excitements and the privations and the wonders that we encountered in the 30s during the Depression.
In 1931, under Harold Clurman, Cheryl Crawford, and Lee Strasberg, the group theater is born. For nearly the entire decade of the 30s, the group, which introduces new personalities and the method school of acting, is important on the Broadway scene, though at first far from prosperous. After 2 lean years, Sidney Kingsley's realistic Men in White brings the group its first commercial success. The Times calls it a good, brave play. The group produces William Saroyan's first Broadway play, My Heart's in the Highlands. Its pertinent last line, something's wrong somewhere. Most celebrated group playwright is Clifford Odets. Beginning with Waiting for Lefty, in which he plays a role and which wins a labor union's literary contest, Odets writes 8 plays in 6 years, most of them burning with indignation. Awake and Sing is his first full-length drama, and soon after that comes Golden Boy, whose hero, like so many other heroes of the proletarian 30s, is destroyed by capitalism. For playwrights like Irwin Shaw, author of the bitterly anti-war Bury the Dead, and Lillian Hellman, who writes The Children's Hour, the stage is no place for levity. Several noted dramatists, tired of traditional production methods, form the Playwrights Company and become producers themselves. In the 30s, audiences applaud Sidney Howard's Yellow Jack, Elmer Rice's We the People, and the urbane satires of S.N. Behrman. Robert E. Sherwood's Abe Lincoln in Illinois recreates one memorable moment in American history. Another is Maxwell Anderson's Winterset, the Sacco Vanzetti case. It is the reign of social significance. A number from the Garment Workers Review, Pins and Needles, sums it up.
I'll sing a song with social significance. All other tunes are taboo. I'll get a song that's satirical, putting some significance. I'll get a tune that will do. It will be packed with social facts.
Then I will love you.
For audiences who prefer to forget for a while the social conflicts around them, there are such productions as Norman Bell Geddes' version of Hamlet, starring Raymond Massey and Celia Johnson. There are also the incomparable musicals of George Gershwin. Who could ask for anything more than I Got Rhythm? It's the age of swing, and the doors open at 6 a.m. for 3,000 chilled subjects of King Benny Goodman. For stay-at-homes, there's that relatively new and inexpensive form of entertainment, radio, which offers a little bit of everything from the Philharmonic to Major Bow's Amateur Hour.
Around, around she goes, and where she stops, nobody knows. Now come the FFM tenors. What does FFM stand for?
Fulton Fish Market.
All right, the Fulton Fish Market tenors. Let it go.
We shouldered guns and marched away. From Baxter Street, we marched to Ivanhoe. The drum and fine, so sweetly they did play, as we marched, marched, marched at the Mulligan Guard.
From the grab bag of radio come quiz shows and soap operas, as well as many programs that make striking use of the medium.
Radio was in those days an extraordinarily active and exciting place. Technically, all kinds of wonderful things were happening. You had Norman Corwin starting his shows, Irving Reese, who started life as an engineer and became a director, invented a whole series of effects, the whole business of echo chambers and perspectives, Orson's programs, Mercury Theatre on the Air, and others. All these were in their prime in those days. For instance, even as news shows, the March of Time, week after week, came up with extraordinary pieces of imaginative reporting and reproduction of world events.
But in the 30s, realism is inevitably balanced by escapism. It seems to comfort hard-pressed Americans to read in Pearl Buck's The Good Earth that Chinese peasants have it even worse. Far from the proletarian scene are John O'Hara's taut, tough novels, and John P. Marquand's class consciousness is that of the elegant Bostonian George Apley. The bestseller lists feature Kenneth Roberts' Northwest Passage, and other discursive historical novels like Walter D. Edmonds' Drums Along the Mohawk. Such bulging tomes give thrifty readers endless hours of diversion. Hervey Allen's mammoth Anthony Adverse practically never ends. The unquestioned champion is Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind, a 1,037-page excursion back to the Civil War, which sells more than 1 million copies in 6 months. The screen adaptation, starring Clark Gable and Vivian Leigh, has its premiere in Atlanta. And for a few hysterical hours, it's as if California's Hollywood and Vine has been moved to Georgia's Peachtree Street. Who cares now about such petty things as farm foreclosures or strikes? In Atlanta, Scarlett's back and Rhett's got her.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I am here just as a spectator. I want to see Gone with the Wind the same as you do. And this is Margaret Mitchell's night and the people of Atlanta's night. Allow me, please, to see Gone with the Wind as a spectator. Thank you.
The stars of Never Never Land shine in countless pictures that hardly relate to reality. And the biggest stars like Greta Garbo themselves seem otherworldly. In 1934, everybody's fairy princess, Shirley Temple, twinkles through one of movie land's quainter escapist fantasies.
Mr. Cromwell, I've got great news for you.
What's the excitement?
The Depression is over.
The Depression is over?
Oh, do you realize that? Factories are opening up. Men are going back to work by the thousands. Our farm products are being sold the world over. Savings accounts are heaping up. The banks are pouring out new loans. There is no unemployment. Fear has been banished. Confidence reborn. Poverty has been wiped out. Laughter resounds throughout the nation. The people are happy again. We're out of the red.
Meanwhile, back on the dole, the real-life picture is not so rosy. Utopia is still very much around the corner, and the intellectuals of the time are preoccupied with many unresolved problems, as critic Dwight MacDonald points out.
For many of us, the 30s were a time of political education. Our actions were marginal and even absurd. What was important wasn't what we did, but what we were thinking about and talking about. The 14th Street and Greenwich Village cafeterias in those days were, to us, what the Parisian cafes were in the 20s to the intellectuals of that time and place. For the price of a cup of coffee, you were entitled to endless discussions of the finest points of political theory. The notion that everything could be changed for the better, and basically, from the subway system on up, was still an open question.
Nowhere are the debates waged more fiercely than on college campuses, where anti-war rallies engage the thoughts and tongues of students, many of whom will scarcely graduate before they themselves don uniforms. The fall of Ethiopia, the Spanish War, and Munich cast successive palls. Soon the shadow of war will approach the United States itself. For creative Americans, it is a time both to speculate about the future and to reflect on the decade just ending. A decade of critical examination of their country and themselves. A tense and turbulent period in which troubled artists found themselves uniquely bound up with a troubled society, and perhaps more than ever before, became a part of their time.